once Julie and Ethan were cast, they both came to Austin, and you kind of all got to know each other a little bit for a while, worked on the script a bit more. Can you tell me like everything you remember about those days, like where you went, what you watched? You said you watched some films or something. Can you elaborate as much as you remember about that period? Because I think that period of time is not documented at all, and I think it's quite interesting in terms of how the film got shaped.
I remember we picked up Julie. We took her to an Italian restaurant. We then picked up Ethan at the airport. People recognized him at the airport because he had made the movie Reality Bites. And he also, this is really funny, but just that very week, he was in the tabloids. He was in the tabloids dancing with Julia Roberts. And so I think he was getting quite a bit of attention. I remember people saying hello to him. We went to a club to watch a band, but I remember Ethan was besieged with attention, and I remember it was a little bit frightening because the people were kind of pressing in, and he and I were talking, and I remember he took me into a corner and said, "Please block the way," because the people were coming at him and he was getting a little nervous. And so I like blocked him in and talked to him. That was interesting. You know, you could feel the press of people who just recognized this famous guy. He was 23 years old. Julie was 24 years old. We met at Rick's office. I remember the room we sat in. I remember there's an open window behind Rick, and we read through the script and we talked about it. We watched, I think the movie was called The Clock. I think it was a 1940s movie. Does that sound familiar? The Clock.
No, I'm not familiar with it. Okay. American film, is it?
Yeah. 1940 black and white. I could be wrong about the title. We played ping pong. We went to a restaurant, and I think the restaurant was called Mars. And I remember and that was I remember inside, it was a gorgeous restaurant. It was in these red and beautiful. It was a beautiful restaurant. And I remember Ethan was telling us about Robin Williams because he had been in Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams, and he talked about working with Robin Williams and about what a generous person Robin Williams was. I remember this was maybe like a three-day encounter, and then there was some goodbye breakfast held in a hotel. I think that might have been in a nice hotel, and maybe it was the Four Seasons or something. And we said goodbye because we were then going to be meeting again in Vienna. So you have to remember, this was in 1994. So this was 30 years ago, and say 4 months ago. So it was a lot for me.
It was a while ago.
Yeah, this was my very first movie. And so it was a really crazy experience to write the thing in April of 1993 and then be, getting ready to have the thing filmed a little more than a year later. I really did not understand then how fortunate I was that it's very, very difficult to get a movie made. And I didn't understand that at all. So, it was a crazy experience, and it was kind of a lot to digest. But those are the main things I can tell you right now. Yeah.
In regards to conversations about the script and the characters, do you remember anything in particular? Did anything stand out like that? Maybe that then change something because of a conversation that was had between the four of you?
Um, I wanted to get um, the female voice in there a little bit more strongly because you had to understand, Rick had been my director twice before. And so in a sense, and even though we were friends, we became friends after I met him on Slacker. He had been, in a sense, my boss. He had cast me twice, and he had been my director. So I took instructions from him. I, as a first-time screenwriter, was just learning things. It was the very first time I wrote a screenplay, and it was the very first time I worked on a computer, and it was the very first time I learned like the formatting of a script. So one thing I really wanted to get in there was more of a female voice, and I did not want to be offensive. And I think it's interesting to say this to you now in 2024, because so much has happened as far as, the female voice goes. But I felt like I needed to um, tread lightly while he and I were working on the story together, because there were some things that I wanted to tweak and change, but I didn't. I know that while people are creating, they're sensitive, and it's not really the time. Sometimes I know this as a teacher, it's not really the moment. You want to wait until a little bit later to say this one right here. Let's like, let's work on this one a little bit. So I think I brought that up a bit in our meetings, and discussed it a bit with Julie, that I felt like we needed to get the female voice in there, and I had some areas where I wanted to get it in there. Um, like for example, the scene with the belly dancer. During that time, I had been studying belly dance, which was for me this really, it was like this woman empowerment thing, because it's supposed to be the oldest dance on earth. It's a birth dance. It's kind of in a roundabout way about female power, and female the female body as being a portal for life on the planet. And so I really wanted to get a belly dance scene in there, because I thought it was my way, one of my ways of injecting this idea. I didn't want there the female voice and the feminine voice were still having a real struggle in the 1990s. Even though we had, there was a rock and roll movement called Girls. Do you know that? It's GRRRRLS. Do you know that movement?
I don't think so. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. It was a female rock and roll movement in the United States. It was kind of an outgrowth of punk, and it was females trying to have a voice, because you know I don't know, people are always struggling to have a voice, right? I mean, everybody is. So I was trying to get that voice injected into the story, and I knew I needed to tread lightly and play the game so that I could get her voice in a powerful way. I wanted to stay true to myself and true to the character. So that was something that I remember I brought up in the meetings.
Thanks for sharing that. I think in the UK, our version of Girls would have been the Spice Girls. Probably that was the UK version at that
Yeah,
time.
that's right. That's right, because they were about female empowerment. They were, weren't they?
Yeah, and that was that whole. That's what made them blow up so big in the UK. That kind of lit something that grew and grew, and many other things happened off the back of that in the UK. So I think maybe America had your own version of that.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's an interesting parallel that you brought in. Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
interesting to me. I can see that now.